It began on a Monday morning inside the towering lobby of Hawthorne Industries. The glass walls glistened, the marble floors shone, and the chandeliers sparkled like a crown over a kingdom of wealth. Employees in tailored suits hurried past with lattes in hand, their polished shoes clacking against the floor. But in the corner stood a man most didn't even notice. James Carter. Dressed in faded blue overalls, he quietly mopped the floor. His posture was humble, but his eyes told a different story. Sharp, steady, and watchful. Two executives walked by, their laughter loud enough for everyone to hear. "Careful not to slip on the janitor's wax," one said with a smirk. "Relax," the other chuckled. "He probably doesn't even know what a lawsuit is." Their laughter echoed across the lobby. James didn't respond. He dipped his mop back into the bucket and kept working. But his silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. What no one in that building knew was that James Carter wasn't just a janitor. He was the new majority shareholder of Hawthorne Industries. And that morning, he had chosen to come in disguise, to see how his company truly treated people who didn't wear suits. Inside the conference hall, the tension was thick. Executives whispered about budget cuts, about rumors of layoffs, and about a mysterious new owner no one had yet met. Then James entered. Still in his janitor uniform, he carried only a folder and walked slowly to the back of the room. At first, no one paid attention until the same mocking executives noticed. "This is absurd," one muttered. "Why is maintenance in here?" The other raised his voice so the floor manager could hear. "This is a shareholders' meeting. Why is the janitor here? Shouldn't he be scrubbing toilets?" A few people chuckled. Heads turned. Some smirked. Others looked away in discomfort. But James didn't flinch. He walked straight to the podium. His steps were calm. His presence, suddenly impossible to ignore. He placed the folder down, straightened his posture, and spoke. "I'm here because this is my meeting." The room froze. Murmurs rippled through the air. James opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents. "My name is James Carter. As of last month, I acquired 60% ownership of Hawthorne Industries, which means I am your new CEO." Gasps filled the room. Pens dropped. Eyes widened. The mocking executives went pale, their earlier laughter now a heavy weight hanging around their necks. James let the silence linger before he continued. "This morning, I came dressed as a janitor, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see how this company treats those it believes are beneath them. And what I saw disappointed me." The executives shifted in their seats. Some looked ashamed. Others looked nervous. James' voice grew sharper. "In just a few hours, I was dismissed, ignored, and mocked. Not because of my work, not because of my character, but because of an assumption that a man holding a mop must be less than a man holding a briefcase." He paused, his eyes locking on the two men who had laughed at him in the lobby. They couldn't meet his gaze. Their hands fidgeted. Sweat gathered at their temples. "And arrogance like that," James said slowly, "has no place in the future of this company." The room was silent now. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. James leaned closer to the microphone. "From this moment forward, Hawthorne Industries will not be built on mockery and entitlement. It will be built on respect. Promotions and partnerships will no longer depend on who shouts the loudest, but on who brings dignity and value to this company." He closed the folder. His voice softened, but the weight of his words struck even harder. "For those who laughed this morning, consider this your warning. Change begins today. And for some of you," he let the sentence trail off. His eyes scanned the room. The tension was unbearable. "Change may come faster than you think." Just then, before anyone could respond, the heavy double doors at the back of the hall burst open. All eyes turned as a woman in a sharp navy suit walked in, a folder tucked under her arm. The receptionist's voice carried across the stunned silence. "Board attorney, Ms. Evelyn Price." Gasps erupted. People whispered nervously. Evelyn Price was infamous, a corporate lawyer feared for dismantling entire companies from the inside. She walked to the front, her heels clicking like a countdown. Her eyes met James's for a moment, then shifted to the board members. When she spoke, her voice was calm but cutting. "I have here a list of executives under investigation for fraud, harassment, and insider trading. And I think Mr. Carter will want to hear this." Panic spread across the room. Executives exchanged horrified looks. The two who had mocked James earlier looked as if the ground had vanished beneath their feet. James folded his arms, his expression unreadable. But behind his eyes burned a quiet fire. The humiliation of this morning had been only the beginning. Now justice was about to cut deeper. They thought the worst was over, but the real storm was only beginning. And when the truth comes out, not everyone will survive it. The boardroom was no longer a place of authority. It was a pressure cooker, and every executive sitting around that polished oak table felt the heat. James Carter stood at the podium, calm and unshaken. But beside him now stood someone far more intimidating to the guilty. Evelyn Price, the board attorney with a reputation for tearing corporations apart, piece by piece. Her navy suit was pristine, her expression razor-sharp. She opened the folder in her hand, sliding a stack of documents onto the table. Her voice was steady, but carried an edge that silenced even the whispers. "Within this folder," Evelyn said, "is evidence of misconduct, fraud, harassment, and insider trading. Some of you in this very room are named." A cold wave swept through the hall. Every face turned pale. Hands fidgeted. Papers shuffled nervously. James folded his arms, his gaze moving slowly across the executives. Some avoided his eyes. Others sat frozen, their forced smiles now masks crumbling under the weight of truth. Evelyn continued. "For years, Hawthorne Industries has suffered not from the market, not from competition, but from the rot within. That rot ends today." The room erupted into low murmurs of panic. One executive slammed his hand on the table. "This is outrageous," he barked. "You can't just walk in here and accuse us." Evelyn's head turned sharply toward him. "Accuse?" she said coldly. "No, Mr. Wexler. I don't accuse. I prove." She slid a document across the table. "Wire transfers, fake invoices, offshore accounts, all tied to your name." Gasps filled the room. Wexler's face drained of color. He stammered, his voice cracking. This is a misunderstanding." James leaned forward, his tone quiet but heavy. "The only misunderstanding was thinking arrogance could hide corruption." Wexler sank back into his chair, his protest silenced. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She flipped to another page. "Mr. Dalton, Director of Operations. Multiple complaints of workplace harassment, buried by your friends on this board. Did you really think they would never surface?" Dalton's face turned crimson. His jaw tightened, but his silence was an admission in itself. The walls of the boardroom seemed to close in. Executives who had once carried themselves with untouchable authority now looked like children caught stealing candy. The air was thick with fear. James spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension. "This company will be rebuilt, not on greed, not on arrogance, but on respect. The days of mocking the people who keep these walls standing are over." The employees in the back of the hall, assistants, clerks, staff shifted. For the first time, they weren't invisible. They were seen, and their eyes lit with something new, hope. But just as the tide began to turn, Evelyn's voice dropped lower. "There's one more name," she said, her tone colder than ever. "One more file, and this one goes deeper than theft or harassment. This one threatens the entire foundation of Hawthorne Industries." The room went dead silent. Every breath held, every eye fixed on her. She didn't reveal the name, not yet. Instead, she closed the folder with deliberate slowness. "The details," she said, "are too sensitive to announce publicly. Mr. Carter, we need to speak privately." The executives exchanged frantic glances. Whispers hissed around the table like snakes in the grass. Who was it? Who was the final name? What crime could be so dangerous it couldn't be spoken aloud? James nodded once, his expression unreadable. He turned back to the room. "This meeting is adjourned. But for some of you, the reckoning has just begun." The gavel of his words struck harder than any judge's hammer. The room erupted. Some executives protested. Others tried to defend themselves. A few quietly slipped out, already planning their next move. But James didn't stay to watch. He and Evelyn walked out together, her folder clutched tightly under her arm. In the hallway, Evelyn lowered her voice. "James, you need to see this. It's not just about corruption. It's bigger, much bigger." James narrowed his eyes. "How big?" Evelyn paused, her lips tightening. "Big enough that if this leak, Hawthorne Industries won't just lose executives, could collapse entirely." The air grew colder. James clenched his jaw. Collapse. The word echoed in his mind like a thunderclap. But before Evelyn could explain further, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her face went pale. "It's starting," she whispered. James frowned. "What's starting?" Evelyn looked up, her eyes sharp with urgency. "They know we have the files." At that moment, the lights in the hallway flickered. The echo of hurried footsteps filled the building. Somewhere in the distance, voices shouted. Angry voices. James glanced at Evelyn, his expression hardening. This was no longer about boardroom politics. This was a war. The hallway of Hawthorne Industries was no longer quiet, pulsed with chaos. Shouts echoed from the boardroom. Heavy footsteps thundered against the marble floor. James Carter stood firm, his eyes locked on Evelyn Price. Her phone screen still glowed, the message clear. "They know we have the files." Before James could respond, a group of executives stormed out of the boardroom, their faces twisted with panic and fury. At the front was Dalton, the director of operations who had been exposed for harassment. His voice was sharp, his finger pointing like a blade. "You think you can walk in here, Carter, and tear everything apart? You don't know what you're up against." James met his glare without flinching. "I know enough. Enough to end this." Dalton sneered, but his bravado cracked. Behind him, Wexler's face was pale with fear. Others whispered frantically, their carefully built empires trembling like glass. Evelyn stepped forward, her folder clutched tight. "Gentlemen," she said coldly, "you should be more worried about the law than your titles." Dalton's face flushed red. He took a step forward, but James raised a hand. "Not here," James said firmly. "Not like this." For a moment, silence fell. Then Dalton spat on the floor and stormed past, his footsteps fading into the distance. James turned to Evelyn. "We need to secure those files. If they'll risk everything to stop us, then what's in that folder is even worse than we imagined." Later that night, James sat in a quiet office with Evelyn. The blinds were drawn. The only light came from a desk lamp illuminating the folder that had shaken the boardroom to its core. Evelyn spread out the documents. Her voice was low, each word deliberate. "This isn't just fraud or harassment, James. It's collusion. Offshore accounts tied to government contracts. Bribes disguised as consulting fees. And here," she tapped a page with her pen, "environmental violations. Toxic waste dumped in low-income neighborhoods to save money." James' eyes darkened. "How long?" "Years," Evelyn replied, "covered up by those executives. Every cent of profit lined with someone else's suffering." James clenched his fists. He thought back to the laughter in the lobby, the arrogance, the mockery. It wasn't just about disrespect anymore. It was about lives. Families poisoned by greed. Communities destroyed by corruption. "They mocked a janitor," James murmured. "But this mocks humanity." The office phone rang, sharp and sudden. Evelyn froze, then picked it up cautiously. On the other end, a voice spoke, low, menacing. "You think you can expose us? Carter won't make it to the morning. And neither will you, Ms. Price." The line went dead. James stood slowly. His face was calm, but his jaw tightened like stone. "They're desperate," he said, "which means we're close." Evelyn looked at him, her expression tense. "Close to what, James?" He turned toward the window, his reflection staring back at him. "The truth. and they're terrified of it. The next morning, the shareholders gathered again. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Security lined the walls. Reporters crowded the entrance. Whispers filled the air like storm clouds. James walked to the podium, the folder in his hand. Evelyn stood beside him, her presence like a shield. He opened the folder slowly. The executives squirmed in their seats. Dalton wasn't there. Neither was Wexler. They had vanished, their absence speaking louder than any denial. James' voice filled the hall. For too long, this company has been poisoned from within. The files in my hand prove not just arrogance, not just corruption, but crimes against the very people we were meant to serve. Fraud, harassment, bribery, environmental destruction. This ends today. Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. James raised the folder high. These documents are no longer just in my possession. Copies have already been delivered to federal investigators, the press, and law enforcement. A wave of panic swept through the guilty. But James' voice thundered above it. You cannot silence truth. You cannot bury justice. Not anymore. Within days, arrests followed. Wexler and Dalton were taken into custody. Others resigned in disgrace. Hawthorne Industries trembled, but it did not fall. James rebuilt the company from the ground up. He promoted the overlooked. He raised the voices that had been silenced. The janitors, the clerks, the assistants, they became the backbone of a new Hawthorne Industries. And for the first time, the company was not just profitable. It was respected. But James never forgot the moment in the lobby. Two men laughing at a janitor with a mop. Two men who saw only what they wanted to see, and were blind to the truth standing in front of them. Steady, heartfelt. They mocked him. They dismissed him. They thought power lived only in suits and briefcases. But in the end, it wasn't money or titles that triumphed. It was dignity, and dignity always wins. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that respect should never be optional, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss the stories where prejudice falls and justice is unmasked.